Yeah, so welcome to the next Testimonies from the War seminar. With this seminar, we are starting kind of new format among our seminars, because before we either focused on our own work or invited few colleagues who were kind of invited to reflect on our work and then their work in comparison. But after a short discussion, we decided that now we more to focus more in depth on research which corresponds with our own work, because we need some more inspiration. We want to reflect on the research that is similar, maybe different at some point, but definitely focuses on the ongoing Russian aggression and invasion on Ukraine. So with this seminar, we are studying this format, and today we have our colleague Anna Chebotarova, who conducted research on Ukrainian displaced internally in Ukraine, but also on Ukrainian citizens displaced to Romania and Norway. And she will talk about this research, focusing on the issues of belonging, space, personal experiences. And I'll introduce Anna briefly. Anna is an old colleague of mine. We just tried to figure out where did she got her PhD from, and I realized that she didn't get it yet, which is kind of unbelievable, because she's a very experienced scholar, and she'll get it soon. I mean, the PhD. So she's a sociologist, and she is a doctoral research fellow at the Department of Literature, Area Studies, and European Languages at the University of Oslo. I needed to read it because it's complicated. So she's based now in Norway, and she's engaged in the international project National Values and Political Reforms in Post-Maidan Ukraine. But before that, she worked as a coordinator of the Ukrainian regionalism research platform project at the University of St. Gallen. And this is how many of you might got familiar with Anna's work. She was also affiliated with the Polish Academy of Sciences, where I am based, and also at the Center for Urban History in Central Eastern Europe in Lviv, Ukraine, where, as far as I understand, most of the interviews Anna conducted for the current project will be archived. Anna graduated from the Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology at Central European University, and also from Ivan Franko Lviv National University. And this is the official presentation or introduction. For the internal part, I can add that we have been cooperating in various projects with Anna, among others, in the project about the void communities in the post-war Poland and Ukraine. Post-war meaning the post-World War II, Poland and Ukraine. And this is really, I think, when I just verbalized this post-war, I realized how much the notion of post-war is changing now, because up to now, post-war kind of by default meant post-Second World War. Now it's not that obvious. But the research that Anna is going to talk about today is connected and focused on the most important war which is happening now. And what is also important to mention is that this research is closely connected with our research we are doing in Poland and Ukraine within Testimonies from the War, because Ania has been using more or less the same documents and more or less the same methodology. So I will be happy to hear about what was different, what was similar, what worked, what didn't work in your research. So the floor is yours. You have more or less 30 minutes, and then I will probably have some comments, and we'll also open the floor to the audience.
Thank you very much, dear Anya, for such an elaborate introduction. I just want to warn that this is very much a research work in progress, and I'm hoping that this seminar will be an opportunity for us all to exchange our experience and maybe some know-how, some techniques, and some ideas. And I'm sure that many of you who are also dealing with researching contemporary war are dealing with very similar challenges. So I hope that this can be a fruitful floor for our exchange and discussion. I will now start sharing my presentation. I hope that you can see it. Can you? Do you see my screen?
Yes, I mean, I see it.
You see it, okay.
Yeah, so
Sorry,
I guess the others see it
because there was some, okay. So today I will talk about the labyrinths of conducting research in a wartime, and what are certain threats that maybe help us find our path in this labyrinth, and also how our own position and experience influences the research that we are conducting. And I will talk about my experience of wartime research in Ukraine, Norway, and Romania. As Anna already mentioned, I started my work at University of Oslo just a couple of months before the full-scale invasion. And the idea, the focus of our project was on political reforms in post-Euromaidan Ukraine and their societal perception. Of course, we had the whole project design planned, surveys and focus group discussions. But after February 2022, after the initial stage of shock, we've repurposed the whole project design, and we tried also to respond to the rapidly changing and extreme situation that Ukrainian society, Ukrainians found themselves in. So the new general overarching focus of this research became on the intersection between popular expectations and state resilience in wartime Ukraine. And here we mean both political and societal resilience. But a little bit further in this presentation, I will talk about approaching the idea, the concept of resilience more critically, and how qualitative data can help us in that. This is a mixed research study. So first and foremost, we rely on the survey data, both secondary surveys and also the surveys that were conducted by our project team in 2022-23. But I personally came forward with the idea of adding the in-depth interviews with people who were forcefully displaced because of the war. Because the scale of this phenomenon has been too important and too large to be not taken into consideration, and therefore we've chosen three like case study locations: Romania, Norway, and also internal Ukrainian dynamics with the focus on internally displaced people. Altogether, so far, I've conducted 32 interviews. I know it's not so much, but I think it already gives us a lot of food for thought, and also is an important addition to many of documenting and interviewing projects that are going on across Europe today. And I think it's really important that we cooperate together in exchanging our findings and research methodologies. I also conducted additional expert interviews, but I'm not going to talk about them so much. I will focus more on the interviews with involuntarily dislocated people. Of course, like many of you, before starting this project, I had to go through the rigorous process of ethical approval. But I thought that it was quite useful because it gave me time to shape my methodology and to mature my research design more. And the main concerns that the Ethical Commission had about the project was ensuring anonymity of the respondents because of the sensitivity of the topic. Therefore, we've conducted all the interviews under the precondition of anonymity. They were concerned about conducting fieldwork in Ukraine, but in this case, I guess my Ukrainian citizenship played a decisive role because I was allowed to go and do the fieldwork in Ukraine. For example, my colleague who is from Lithuania, and she also had a project which anticipated the fieldwork in Ukraine, she was not allowed to do that. So this also tells us a lot about certain decisions and possibilities within the research infrastructure. And the third concern and like demand which they had, that I also have a little bit challenges how to deal with, is the removal of sensitive data after the project. So after the project ends. So I'm expected to either remove all the recorded data and leave only transcripts that are fully anonymized, or I am to erase all the sensitive or personal data in the audio recordings. And I think that this is still a question to be discussed. And the last concern that the Commission had was about the third persons who are mentioned in the interviews, because of course I've signed informed consent with each project participant, with each respondent, but the problem that the Commission had was that the third persons did not provide their consent. Therefore, their information has to be handled with particular care. In this project, I apply mixed methodology that helps us investigate how the phenomena that we observe on macro level are manifested and fragmented when we zoom into micro level. And particularly, I use the dialogical approach and emergent mixed method design, where we kind of take into account a certain unexpected situation and outcome in the process of developing the research. So the main focus of my personal research is on the impact of war and dislocation on identities and belonging, but the questionnaire itself is designed to provide a more wider framework. It is a semi-structured interview, biographically driven, which focuses both on pre-war life, wartime experience, the adaptation in host societies, and the plans for future. As Anna mentioned, I also plan to archive the anonymized transcripts in the archive of the Center for Urban History. And of course, I had to obtain a particular and separate consent from the Commission for that as well. It came out to be a multi-sided field study, and maybe I will explain a little bit why these particular countries and case studies. So of course, Norway was an obvious choice as a country where I'm based in and where our project is being conducted, but also because of a coincidence, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, I was in Romania. I was visiting my husband, who was on a research stay there. And basically, the first 2 months of the full-scale invasion, I spent on the train and bus stations of Bucharest, helping to manage and to support the thousands of people who were crossing through Romania. It was a very emotional experience, but also very important. Of course, I did not feel like doing any kind of interviews back then. I thought it was absolutely impossible. But after some time, namely in the summer of 2022, I started thinking and discussing with my colleagues how to develop a possible research project. And then, of course, I thought that it is important, really important, to also include Ukraine in this discussion and in the project design. And therefore, I conducted interviews in Lviv, Chernivtsi, and Uzhhorod in Ukraine. So to give a more like maybe general framework on the current situation, the most recent estimates that the Eurostat provides is that around 4 million people have fled, are currently under temporary protection in the EU. So it's not that there is no data on Germany and Spain, it's just that it hasn't been provided. But we can see that in case of Norway and Romania, the ratio per 1,000 people is around European average. But in case of Norway, it is a little bit higher. So now it's 71,000 people that are dislocated into Norway and 154,000 in Romania. When it comes to the situation with internally displaced people in Ukraine, we have here the International Organization for Migration report, which estimates the number of IDPs as around 3.6 million, and interestingly, over 4 million returnees. And here I also wanted to draw your attention to the dispersion of the internally displaced people within Ukraine. And we can see that still Kharkiv and Dnipro region are those that host most of IDPs. And I thought that it's important also for me to recognize my own decisions and the fact that I decided to conduct my interviews in a so-called more safe regions. I did not decide to go to Kharkiv or Dnipro, even though it might have been much more justified from the sociological point of view. But I think that it's important to recognize that we as researchers are also kind of drawing our own imagined circles of safety. And for me, I think the underlying idea was that in Lviv, Chernivtsi, and Uzhhorod, I can at least try to provide a safe interview environment for my respondents. So, for example, the air raid sirens are more rare in these regions, and I can think about some bomb shelters that we go in. But for example, in Kharkiv, where air raid sirens are very frequent and also bombing, it would have been much more difficult. But of course, it's also about, I think, my own fears and concerns that I have to recognize. So I thought that I could go to Kharkiv, but maybe not to conduct interviews, but just to be there and to meet some friends. But I thought that the situation there wouldn't be safe enough for me to actually conduct the field work. And even though the choice of Romania and Norway was more situational when it comes to like 2 case study countries, it actually provides a very interesting comparative framework because of very different approaches to migration governance in this country when it comes to the forced migration of Ukrainians. So Romania is an EU, but non-Schengen country. I mean, it has changed recently because you can now travel to the airports in Romania as in Schengen zone. But when it comes to land checkpoints, it's still not fully integrated. And it is characterized by a very liberal temporary collective protection policy. So, for example, Ukrainians are free to choose their place of residence. They have permission to visit Ukraine practically as often as they want. There is very limited welfare support program. So the state support program was going on only until May 2023. And now there is a limited possibility to get support from international organizations. And as we see from these numbers, over 4 million people passed through Romania. So this is a very important also transit movement, transit migration country that played an important role, particularly in the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And also when we look at the structure of regions of origin of Ukrainians there, it's a mostly resettlement hub for people from the south of Ukraine. Norway is, on the contrary, in Schengen, but not in the European Union. It has very high welfare entitlements. So people participate in the introduction program, which is compulsory, and they receive financial aid and housing support. So at the first stage, you are very well supported by the Norwegian state. But on the other hand, there is also a very strict governance of the temporary collective protection migration flows. So first, people are placed in the refugee reception center, then in temporary locations, and then they are assigned a particular place where they are supposed to live. So it's very difficult to actually choose where you can live in Norway. For over 20% of people, Norway is a country of secondary relocation. So this is like a destination country that often comes after another experience. And the most important change that has been introduced in December 2023 is the ban on travels to Ukraine, and it has had a very strong impact on the situation of Ukrainians here, because they can no longer travel to Ukraine unless there is some very, very serious purpose, and therefore they can, if they do, they can lose their collective protection status. So what was the way for me to kind of to find my respondents? It was a very a complicated decision at the beginning, and I thought that what I should prioritize is a fully informed voluntary participation, because of exactly the sensitivity of this topic. And we can call this a purposive convenience sample, because I was collecting my sample from the available pool of respondents. So my main tool of recruiting was through social networks. So I posted the very elaborated information on myself and also on the project in the main groups on Facebook and Telegram, and also the registration form where people who wanted to actually participate in my research could register. So of course, such type of sample can be criticized, and is very criticized in literature, because of the researcher's bias, and also both in sampling and participant selection, the lack of variety, the limited external validity. So we cannot really kind of impose or share our findings on other research, and also some unexpected unknown errors that might occur around the way. But also I would argue, and at least my experience is that such type of sampling gives us a good point of reflection on which groups are willing or not willing to share their stories. And also we could ask why. And what I did at the very beginning, I exactly at the beginning of the interview, I asked my respondents why they responded to my announcement in this social network, what motivated them to participate in the research. And there were like three main types of motivation. First is narrative, and I think this is like the most ideal for us. So people who say that it's really important for them to share the story, that the memory erases these events very quickly, and if they don't tell someone if it's not recorded somewhere, then they won't believe that they actually went through this. But also, like, two other very popular types of motivation were supportive and aspirational. So many people who, for example, whose relatives did some projects in sociology or psychology, or who themselves somehow worked with academia, even if in a totally different domain, they also saw it as a way to kind of provide support to a fellow researcher. And finally, the most complicated motivation to work with is aspirational. some people saw the interview as a way of like changing the situation for better in their case. And here I had to be very honest in explaining that I'm not doing a politically oriented research, that it won't have immediate consequences, that of course I'm going to share these findings, but in a more scholarly manner. So I also had to be very honest about that. And of course, for a lot of people, they saw me maybe as a source of knowledge or help, as a volunteer or as a person who came from Norway. And in this case, it was really important for me to, of course, I was happy to provide some help and information whenever I could, but I made sure that I did it only after the interview. So I think that in this complicated nexus of research relationship, it's very crucial to be honest with each other and open from the very beginning. So I found this exercise to be quite useful. So who actually responded and agreed to participate in my interviews? As we can see, these were mostly people aged middle-aged people from 35 to 64, and in case of Romania and Norway, mostly women. Of course, this has to do with the general demographics of Ukrainian presence in this country, but also, and I will talk about this later, on a certain stigmatization of male presence abroad that we as a researchers also deal with. And in case of Ukraine, I think I was motivated to find more also male respondents to somehow counterbalance these discrepancies. So I also used a more like targeted approach when I had more people willing to participate. And mostly these were people with higher or secondary specialized education. So it's also a reality that we have to deal with, that more educated people are likely to respond to such kind of announcements. What was particularly revelatory for me was the language of the interview. And as you can see, in even though like in all cases people mostly came from eastern and southern part of Ukraine, in Romania I mostly conducted interviews in Russian. In Norway it was also either Russian or mixed, but in case of Ukraine, most of people wanted to speak Ukrainian. And I think this tells us a lot about the societal pressure to speak Ukrainian that exists also particularly in the western part of Ukraine. And of course, I fully support the popularization of Ukrainian language, but it was also very important for me to make people as comfortable as possible to speak their own native language, particularly when they talk about the traumatic events and the ordeals that they gone through. And just recently, I also came back to my respondents and asked them whether their situation has changed. And as we can see, in case of Romania, most of people actually migrated further. 1/3 returned, and there is also a very interesting group who said that they just, they live on two countries. So they spend some time in Romania, some time in Ukraine, and this is the main reason for them to stay in Romania, because it actually allows to do that. Whereas in case of Norway and Ukraine, the situation remained more or less the same. And when it comes to the regions of origin of my respondents, I had most of the interviews, so most of the willing participants came from bigger cities like Odessa, Kharkiv, and Kyiv, and also Mykolaiv and Kherson. And at the beginning, I had also lack of respondents from the Donbas, which was very worrying for me. So I tried to kind of share my announcement in the networks, in my personal networks, asking friends to send it further. So I would never interview my own friends or people whom I, for example, helped in the past or with whom I had some personal connection, but I actually asked them to send it further. And then those who are interested could fill in the registration form. And this is how I actually got some of the respondents also from the Donbas. So to sum up the experience of this like convenient sample online recruiting of the respondents, what I've experienced was the lack of willingness to talk from the male respondents abroad, and also even all of my male respondents, they've left Ukraine legally, so they had all the legal reasons to do so, but there still was a very big feeling of like shame and justification of when they were talking about the situation in Ukraine. Also, even though I myself am from Lviv, from west of Ukraine, I had very little volunteers on the behalf of people who fled from the west of Ukraine. So even though there are, I mean, of course, it's shelled much less frequently than for example, the east, but there are certain locations which are very often the subject of missiles attack. And even despite this situation, there is also a like not a taboo, of course, but the people who fled Western Ukraine are seen less favorably, I think. So I think that this gives us a lot of information about certain like social desirability bias that exists in these communities. And as I mentioned before, it was much more difficult to find people from Donbas who would be willing to talk, and particularly from the long-term occupied territories, the non-government controlled territories before the full-scale invasion, and Crimea. Even though I know from for example, the social networks of refugees in Norway, that a lot of people actually moved from these regions via Russia. And that's also a topic that is much less talked about, the route of fleeing occupied territories via Russia. And I think like the biggest group that was missing from my respondents when it comes already to the views that they've expressed were the people with pro-Russian or ambiguous views. So, for example, those who tend to blame Ukraine or NATO for the war, or those who say that it's not everything is so clear and not only Russia is to blame. And of course, I understand that it has to do a lot with my own positionality, and the fact that when people, for example, read my social network, they can learn a lot about my views as well. And it doesn't mean that my respondents did not criticize Ukrainian state. They did. There was a lot of criticism, for example, of the social policy or of the support system to the dislocated people, or the mobilization law. So they were critical towards Ukraine, but also rather pro-Ukrainian. And in this case, this is not the group that is probably easy to access, but also I think that it would be also very difficult for me to talk to these people because of my own views and my own position. So when it comes to my own like positionality constellation and how it has influenced my interaction with the respondents, I think that, of course, the fact that I'm a female researcher helped me find more women among my my interlocutors, but also maybe was a barrier for some of the male respondents to contact me. I don't know. I think so. One of the most like my position or my identity that people mostly reacted to was me being from Lviv. So people had either like very positive or very like tensions attitude to that. And in this case, exactly the fact that I could speak Russian to them freely was a way to reduce this tension. Of course, being a researcher in Norway also was an important identity, particularly for the newcomers to Norway, who saw me also as someone they could talk to about the life in this country, even though I wasn't very experienced, because I just arrived basically a couple of months before them. And the fact that I position myself, and also I write in the social networks as a volunteer, was an important, who helps the armed forces of Ukraine, was also an important link to people whose family members are on the front line, even though my family is not there. And also like talking about the experience of people on the occupied territories, the fact that part of my family is still there was also an important bridge. So I'm talking about all these different positions to show that this mixture and these identities can sometimes act as bridges, and sometimes they can act as not walls, but maybe certain fences to be overcome. But for me, the keys to open these fences was my bilingualism and the fact that I was ready to speak any language that respondent wanted to, openness about myself, and my own like position and project. And also an interesting link was the place knowledge. So the fact that I visited many of the places in Ukraine where actually these people came from became an important bounding subject that we shared when talking during the interview. And I think that the most important was that the interview created a non-judgmental space, because currently the experience of war creates new divisions and cleavages among people, and people also often feel guilt or shame because of not being in their native locations, or not being in Ukraine, or not fighting. And I think that interview can be a good space to actually share this experience without judgment, that people find quite useful. So here I try to reflect a little bit on my own positionality in the situation of a field work, but I think that it's really important to remember and reflect on it on different research stages, starting from design and reading to already writing and dissemination. And I see it as a research tool, a way to frame questions, to choose where to observe and decide, while always focusing on the reasons for my own choices. And in my case, particularly, the insider-outsider position is very multidimensional. And we must account for the context and the relational power between the participants and the researchers. And I think for me, maybe the biggest dilemma was the embodiment dilemma. So not having the refugee experience myself and not being in the active war zone, how do I approach these different lived experiences of war that people share with me? So of course, I've been to Lviv, I read sirens, I've heard bombings and missiles, but it was also crucial for me to build a space of sharing of the experience that I did not feel myself. At the same time, what I found really important was the owning of my positionality, because I think that particularly when you are a local researcher in the Western institution, somehow I felt that the reflections on positionality also make you vulnerable, because in a way you recognize your own subjectivity, you recognize your own affective proximity to the topic. And I wanted just to share with you one of the articles that I found particularly useful to compare. It's the example from media studies on the epistemic injustice in conflict reporting, where the author reconsiders the objectivity, emotionality, and professionalism, activism dichotomies on the example of the collaboration between foreign and local media. So she argues that identity prejudicial credibility deficit is often granted to local media professionals because of their effective proximity to the events. And it mirrors a lot of power vectors. But in practice, this local media professionals' proximity is often appreciated as embodied knowledge that is beneficial to the nuance, accuracy, and ethics of journalistic practices and outcomes. So I think that even though our own embodied knowledge and proximity has its own limitations, it is also important to recognize it as a key to talking about these complicated subjects. And when it comes to research ethics, I found the framework of feminist research ethic, non-extractivist, dialogical approach to research most fruitful. And particularly from this standpoint, I challenge and I not criticize, but I want to nuance the idea of resilience when applied to Ukrainian society. And this is the framework that is very often used and that you can encounter in many conferences and projects, including our own. And here, the article by Malaka Schweik, who talks about she talks about the expectations of resilience and the language of care. And she argues that these expectations may impose supernatural coping mechanisms on communities that are struggling with adversity. To experience. And in turn, she proposes a collective and caring approach that deals with root causes of violence instead of ignoring them. And I find this idea of the language and the ethics of care very compelling, but at the same time, in my opinion, the idea of ethics of care entails also certain hierarchies, because there is always a caregiver and someone who is cared for, and this already creates a certain power imbalance and might create the reproduction of inequalities that Martha Nussbaum is talking about. So I would rather talk about the ethics of empathy rather than care. But I do think that it is really important on the one hand to talk about the really resilience of Ukrainian society in the face of war, but at the same time, not to essentialize it and not to, in a way, positively dehumanize Ukrainians as some, supernatural creatures. Before we come to the question part, I wanted to offer two maybe topics for discussion, and I would be very, very grateful if you could maybe share your insights on these challenges. That's something that I'm myself struggling with. What language do we use in the situation of uncertain categorization? So what I've noticed in my own interviews is that people talk about their status, their identities with a very high degree of uncertainty and permeability. They generally are unwilling to be categorized as refugees. And let's also remember that the status of refugees is not the same as the official temporary collective protection status. And here are some quotes from the interviews. So people compare themselves to uprooted plants, or they say that I just live here and I work here. What am I supposed to be called? And what does it mean to be protected? And as we also saw, even on the example of my small sample, is how fluid these choices and identities are. So people can be IDPs today and they are returnees tomorrow, and they, or if they go to another country, then they are dislocated under collective protection. So it's also very much about fluidity of these choices and statuses. And the framework that I found quite useful, and generally this work has been very helpful for me at the very beginning of my project, is by Anna Chebotarova on involuntary dislocation, home trauma resilience, and adversity activated development. And he uses the notion of involuntary dislocation, or how we translate it into Ukrainian as вимушене переміщення. So by involuntary dislocation, he refers to two distinct but interrelated facets of or moments of dislocation. The experience of no longer feeling home as home, and then the actual movement away from the location that has lost the refugees or forced movement. And moreover, it requires us to consider all the shades and meanings of ambiguities regarding people's decision to flee, instead of just accepting they were forced out. And the term dislocation, what I also like about it is that it can encompass both internal and external experience of dislocation, whereas migration refers exclusively to the latter, to moving abroad. So I was wondering if we could maybe discuss what terms do you use in your research and how do you justify it, why? And the second topic that we might talk about is the ethics of digital participant observation. I don't know how it worked in case of your projects, but for me, social networks, social media, where dislocated people connect to each other and connect also to their host communities, has been a very vital source, I would say, and very, first of all, for finding my respondents, first of all, for connecting to them, but also as a background reading, as a digital resource. So I've been reading these groups and these chats quite intensively. And in this case, we should, I think, discuss how this participant in observation, digital participant observation, should be conducted online. Whom should we inform on our own presence and as a researchers on our goals, and how? What is the ethical voting practice? So for example, for now, I'm just like making notes, and I don't quote these groups directly, but I think if I would to do that, then I would have to probably inform both the person I would like to quote and the moderators. And last but not least, how do we work with deleted online materials? Because we know that, for example, Telegram channels, they can appear today and disappear tomorrow, but nevertheless, this is the information source that over 70% of Ukrainians say that they use in their daily life to connect and to share information. Of course, the Center for Urban History, maybe you already heard about it, has created a Telegram archive where they save these Telegram channels for future, but it is not yet open to the public. And also, I think the ethical guidelines of working with this archive are still to be elaborated. But already today, we are benefiting a lot from these social networks and from these groups. And it would be really interesting to maybe talk about the ethical ways of doing so. Thank you very much for your attention. And I would be happy to answer your questions, and maybe also to hear your thoughts on some of the issues that I've raised here. Thank you.
Anu, thank you so much for this fascinating talk. I have two pages of notes, but I already see hands, so I won't take my privilege of being of speaking. So Ola, you are the first, and I will just jump in when there's space.
Anya, thank you for your presentation, for your sharing experience and research. And I have two questions. First question, how challenges during interview, yes, in process interview, devoted with sensitive information about your respondents and with you, sensitive information, because you are Ukrainian, yes, you are from Lviv, and you have relatives, yes, in occupied territory. And the second question about resonance of two experience, because you said you open information about you are from Lviv, you aren't refuse, yes, you share your experience, and at moment interview we have points of resonance or similarity experience, and how you react and how you react your respondents for information about you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these two very important questions. So when it comes to sensitive information, I mean, I had the biggest problem with the general willingness of my respondents to share medical information with me, either about themselves or particularly about their children, you know. And this all is of course very important, and I understand how it is the part of the experience, and I never asked about it. It was usually something that they shared in certain contexts, but this becomes a nightmare when it comes to the storage of personal information. So unfortunately, I have to erase this information from the transcripts, and for now it is only stored on a secure disk in my university in the form of the audio recordings. But as I mentioned, the biggest problem is that according to the project requirements, I am to either erase these recordings fully or the parts which are particularly sensitive. So so this is the situation we have to deal with. I mean, of course, if people choose to share it, then there is a bigger question about like what is the impact of this rigorous ethical regulations on the actual material that we gather in the process of our field work. I must say I did not feel particularly vulnerable in this situation. So I was happy to share like my own I don't know, identities, experiences, and origin with people, because I think this is just about being honest. If I expect people to share it with me, then I'm also happy to share it with them. And of course, when I, for example, talked about my own family on the occupied territories, I never revealed any details. So I just mentioned it as a generally the presence of such experience in my family, but I did not give any names or even the location where they are now situated. So I think, as I mentioned during the presentation, we all are now like drawing these imagined circles of safety. And I think this applies both to us and to our respondents, just that in the case of respondents, we have an extra responsibility for what they share with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I will now use my my opportunity and my privileged position, and I will just jump in because what Ola asked about resonates so much with what I wanted to discuss or ask about. The entire story about the ethical commission involved in the design of your research, and the story about imposing these particular conditions on your research. I mean, kind of with argument that this is all to protect the people we are talking with, brings to me a story shared with me and with many colleagues by Jakub Gałęziowski, a researcher you might know from Poland. He did a really wonderful research on the Chibo, children born because of the war, mainly because of the rape by the occupying forces. I mean, Russian and German soldiers in Poland. And he did this research in Austria, meaning he was affiliated with the Austrian research institution. And he's a historian, and it was all designed as the oral history project. And there was this component of the moral or ethic impact of the fact that we are sharing this difficult story. And he spent if not years, then months, negotiating with the ethic commission, with the ethic board in his institution, the possibility of not destroying the files, because he was devoted first to create a source, and not only the data that is used by you and then destroyed, but also most of the people that he interviewed actually, and surprisingly, didn't want to remain anonymous, because they precisely treated this fact of speaking and participating in the interview as the act of testifying, as the testimony. So there was this discrepancy between what the ethical committee understands as research and what the researcher and the research participants understand as the research. So he succeeded. He didn't need to destroy the the audio files, which would be such a waste and such a shame. So I'm just listening to your talk and thinking, gosh, again, it's happening again. Someone is pressing you to destroy the really precious. Okay, let's stick to the term data if we don't want to treat it as source, because this is of course very specific. But audio file is the original data you have, and the fact that you are obliged to delete it is really awful. It's just not not talking to me at all. The topic of the ethical commission and the many conditions that are imposed on you. So who is allowed to go to Ukraine and who is not? This is very striking. I just came back from the symposium in Lviv, and I had a long talk with colleagues from France who are not allowed to go at all, whether they are of Ukrainian nationality and citizenship or not. They simply cannot go. So they were officially in Przemyśl, and in reality they were in Lviv. And in our case, in our Polish team affiliated with the Polish academic institution, there were no procedures when we started. I mean, when I first thought, okay, this is the time when I'm going to Ukraine, and that was like a few months ago, I went to my director and asked, so what should I do? And he told, I don't know, because nobody asked so far. Nobody wanted to go. So in the end, we ended up with kind of the procedures that I proposed or created, borrowing them from my husband's institution, because they do go quite often. So each time we go to Ukraine, we need to, me and even Ola and other people from the team who have Ukrainian nationality and citizenship, we need to sign a kind of clause saying that in case I'm killed, my relatives are not going. I mean, literally speaking, in case of anything happens, and you might imagine what does it mean. So in case anything happens, my relatives won't go to the court. So it's literally voiced in this paper we are signing each time. And just a last thing that I want to discuss, because I give the mic to you and to others. I really wanted to thank you for sharing this this thought that you decided to conduct your research in the safe regions, and you kind of had this mixed feelings about that. I mean, I had the same. It took me 2 years until I realized, okay, I can go now. I feel safe enough to go Ukraine again. Although I mean, all my professional life has been connected to Ukraine, and I used to go to Ukraine like a few times a year, and then I didn't. I stopped in 2022, and this spring was the moment when I decided, okay, I can go. And I think that we need to acknowledge that we also have our, as researchers, but also as humans and family members, as citizens, we have our feelings, and we have our fears also, and we might overcome them or not. And it's, I mean, we have the right to overcome them or not. So I still have more notes and questions, but I won't take more time now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anya, for your thoughts. This is very precious and important. Just a very quick reaction, because I think you shared your reflection rather than a question. So when it comes to ethical commission, maybe one of the reasons why they were so strict is because I approached them in summer 2022, and I think like it was very very murky waters. They didn't know what to do and how to design this research, how to proceed with it in their approvals. So I hope that when I come back to them, maybe I can still negotiate concerning the actual audio recordings, and I think I'm still willing to preserve them, even if it demands some editing work from my side, because transcripts are great and they are easy to work with, but so much can be conveyed by voice or by intonations or by this like untextual messages that can be only heard in the transcripts. And as you said also, like my respondents, that they were much more open than the ethical commission would expect them to be. So I think like if there wasn't this presumption of anonymity, maybe a lot of them would even agree to be recorded with their real names. And yeah, about the fears, true. And I think like I still maybe feel a little bit guilty for not going to Dnipro or Kharkiv to conduct interviews, but I think that again the main idea is that I wouldn't be able to ensure the safety of my respondents in these situations, and that's even more important than my own safety. So
thank you very much, Anna, for the presentation of your research. But as I understood, you have conducted all your interviews online, isn't it?
No.
Personally. So
yes.
that
Oh,
you... Okay.
Sorry, I didn't make it clear, but it was also the decision that I made, particularly concerning the interviews in Ukraine. I thought that it would be the most like unjust thing to do if I was to sit in Oslo, for example, and my interlocutors are, I don't know, in Kharkiv, and I talk to them online. So it was a very important decision for me to do all the interviews face to face. So yeah, I actually traveled to all these places. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's very good to know. While it was not clear for me personally, maybe. But I wanted to ask about the assumptions of your research. What was the main goal of main idea? You conducted interviews with people who were in Romania and Norway and in Ukraine. What is the main goal of your research?
Mm-hmm. So there is I think like there is a wider goal of collecting this information, which is bigger than my own research. So I actually want these interviews to be also useful for other researchers and to be archived as an addition to an actual interview archive that exists in Lviv. So that's why I asked about generally biographical stories and how people experienced these dramatic events. But my own particular focus is on the impact of war and displacement on belonging and identities and the popular understanding of what does it mean to be Ukrainian. So that's my focus that I will analyze both from the statistical surveys and the interviews. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I forgotten my.
We can you can ask later. Maybe there are some other questions, or also I'd be happy to share your thoughts, like on maybe on the questions that I've mentioned, or some other reflections that you would like to share.
I can share, for example, from my experience, I conduct interviews in Germany with Ukrainian refugees or with Ukrainian people who were forced to leave Ukraine after February 22. While it's true, I have really different discussions with people, while the main question was, are we refugees? They cannot recognize themselves like refugees. It's really difficult to find the correct word. What is this? It's not only about the social status, it's about who I am. And they want to be a part of, for example, ethical group. They are Ukrainians, they are women, they are mothers, but not refugees. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's also my experience as well. I mentioned it on one of the slides. That's why I'm looking for like a correct term, and this involuntary dislocation, it sounds a little bit complicated, but for now, I think it is probably the most inclusive. But maybe if you have other terms that you find more appropriate to describe this like general experience, then it would be also interesting to hear about that.
I think it's not so easy, but I wanted to ask, have you seen some findings from your interviews?
I mean, what kind of findings?
I don't know, some ideas or some special terms or something what you could feel already.
You mean the terms that people use to describe themselves that could be generalized for the others?
Not only in general. In general, if you have found something what you can say, okay, it's very specific for Ukrainian people.
Well, I think like I mean, I'm in the middle of writing article based on my interview, so it would be very difficult for me just to single out one finding. I think that it depends on the research question, and these interviews, they are exactly quite long. I would say some of them lasted 2-3 hours. So I hope that this will be the fruitful material, not only for me and for my particular research, but also for other people to use in the future.
Yes, I think it's absolutely, you're absolutely right. And I think that this material, these interviews, I have some interviews longer than 2 and 3 hours. And I have such feeling that people, they want to tell, and they tell really the whole story. And sometimes they are not focused on questions, not only on the questions, but you ask them about some specific situation or about some changes in their life, and you become a real story of everyone, of the whole family, and how the situation changed and influenced every family member.
Yeah, that's also my experience. But sometimes, of course, some people are much less willing to share, and we also have to respect that. Some people, I also actually had 2 cases when people asked me not to indicate the locations they come from because they are very much afraid of the people who stay behind. And therefore, I only indicate, for example, that this is Donetsk region or Kherson region, occupied territories, a village, and that's it. And I think that it's also the question who decides what information is safe or not. And sometimes it's the respondent, sometimes it's the researcher, sometimes it's the ethical commission. And these are usually complicated decisions.
I want to address the issue of the language we use and the terms we use, because you specifically asked also about what's happening in our project. So I think that in case of the Polish team, we needed to both invent the language we use for the sake of the Polish public. So whether to use uchodźca, uchodźczyni, or gość, so the refugee or the guest or the whoever, because using the term refugee was, I mean, it was complicated in case of Poland because we don't have so much refugees, and also the notion of refugee was not that much positive so far. It's changed very much with the Ukrainian people coming. But then we also needed to decide which terms we are using when talking with our interviewees, and our basic decision was that we are following their choices, but sometimes you just need to use the word first. So I think that, as far as I remember, that in the beginning Kasia is gone, and she was the one that I mean, we had a lot of discussions about the language with. Kasia was our interviewer in the first round. So I think that we're kind of trying to balance between using the term refugee and forcibly relocated person, so przymusowo tymczasowo przemieszczenie osoby, because generally speaking, Bijency didn't work at all in case of Ukrainians. It worked better with Poles, but not with Ukrainians. But I think that when I'm thinking about the language I used in my interviews and with my interviewees, at some point I simply moved to the more descriptive manner of the attitude to language, which meant that I was just telling that, okay, we are conducting the interviews with the Ukrainians who came to Poland after February 2022, which was very understandable, and there was nothing to explain more. So yeah, so, and I think that it worked quite well. And I have a question also, because you mentioned these motivations people were indicating, so why I chose to participate in the interview. And this one, to preserve the memory, preserve the narrative, and bring the message to the outside world, was quite obvious, and we had it too. I think that we didn't have this. I mean, personally, I didn't have this supportive motivation. I mean, someone participated in my research, so I need to do it as well. But I wanted to ask whether you had this motivation kind of connected with the desire for justice, or for future court or legal purposes, because at least in the beginning, I mean, later they stopped, because I think that they stopped believing it will happen in the near future. But at least in the beginning, many of our interviewees mentioned this motivation. So I want them all and in the card, and I believe that this testimony will be used. And they were specifically asking whether we will make these testimonies available to the prosecutors and so on. And we needed to say that it's not our basic goal. And even if someone comes to us, I mean, a prosecutor, this very testimony in this form won't be very helpful. So the maximum of help the maximum how we can be helpful to the prosecutor is to, if he or she camps, we can say that, okay, we interviewed this kind of person who described this or that, and you might contact this person. Yeah, so I just wanted to ask whether your interviewees had this motivation.
Yes, thank you. That's an important question. So they did not voice it directly when I asked them why you decided to fill in this form, but it was voiced during the interviews, so hoping for justice. And in this case, if, for example, people asked me where they can share this information, I once put them together with Norwegian Helsinki committee that actually contacted Ukrainians who wanted to report war crimes. So I think that for us, at least for myself, I wanted to be prepared to have the list of organizations or people who can actually gather this information in a proper way, because it's obviously not my task to do that, because I'm not equipped with relevant instruments to do that. Another, of course, question is that when people share stories about, for example, collaboration or crimes in their own location, I mean, I don't think we as a researchers are supposed to report it somewhere, but absolutely not. But this is something that happened very often, and that's also some question that was very painful for many people. But whether or not talk about it to relevant authorities, it's only up to our respondents, I think.
I think that the Lviv team had even a consultation with the lawyer concerning this issue. So whether you're obliged as the researcher to report to the authorities, to the prosecutor, that you heard about the crime, because there was this fear that, well, we don't know the rules, we don't know the specific law because we never had to, and we didn't want to be liable in case we need to report, but we don't need to. I mean, we are not obliged to. That's good.
Yeah, no, and but I think I share your sentiment that I think people started to believe in justice less the more time passes from the crimes, and this is of course unfortunate. But we also know that Ukrainian law and international law is a very bureaucratic and long procedure, and many of the perpetrators are simply out of reach for the legislative system. So yeah, but it definitely creates a disappointment. Absolutely.
Just encourage you to use this possibility to ask some more questions, because I don't want to monopolize the floor.
I see also in the chat there is a very interesting idea of using the term newcomers when it comes to Ukrainians. I think it would really can work well in abroad. But when we talk about people displaced within Ukraine, that can be much more tricky, and because it's it's the same country, and yeah, they might be newcomers in this particular city, but they're not newcomers in the country. So it's also a very sensitive issue, and I think we need to be careful. And usually we use what respondents want to be called, but it's also the question of our decisions in when we, for example, write the articles or disseminate our findings.
I'm just thinking about this this notion of the embodied knowledge or the lived experience that is so important in case of this research. And I think that we are discussing it constantly with our colleagues. And I just wanted to share my kind of reflection that there is no ready to go answer to the question whether it's better to have this lived experience or not. There are still scholars who claim that, okay, if you didn't go through this experience, you are not entitled to conduct this research. And I mean, we had a lot of this discussion with colleagues who claim that, okay, if you were not in the occupied Kherson, you cannot understand what people experience. But then it's kind of undermining the very idea of the research. So it would mean that only people from the community of experience can conduct the research. So there wouldn't be much research conducted, specifically speaking.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's a very restrictive framework to put on. I know that, for example, the Holocaust Museum, they tried to pair together Holocaust survivors who would interview each other when we bring example from other research projects. But when I listened to this interviews, I didn't think that it always worked so well. So actually, the experience and the ability of the interviewer also matters a lot. And generally, if we think only about community of experience, then we undermine the whole oral history idea, because very often these are, you know, people from different generations who couldn't physically have this experience interviewing older people. When it comes to, of course, a contemporary event, what I try to avoid is saying I understand when I listen to people, because not always I can understand, but I definitely can listen, and I can empathize, and I can support emotionally. But yeah, of course, certain things can only be understood when lived through.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aniu, for sharing your thoughts and your experience and also your preliminary research. We are looking forward to the paper to reading the paper you're writing, because that was much more focused on methodology. But I do appreciate it so much, because this is the moment when you are sharing with us this, you know, this backstage and this research kitchen, and it's not so frequent. I think that this is my personal opinion, that we much too often focus on the outcomes and on the results, and we forget to reflect on how the knowledge is being produced. So this is just to say that I do appreciate the fact that we are sharing your research on this preliminary stage, and there will be more time to discuss the results. The kitchen is important right now, and it's good you decided to share it with us. So there is a time for the last question from the audience. If not, or maybe if you want to ask this in Ukrainian, because I'm just looking at who stayed with us, and maybe it's about the language.
Można też po polsku?
Można też po polsku. Sami swoi już prawie zostali.
Yeah, I hope that it wasn't too boring for you, because I thought that, okay, I will now share the things that this very knowledgeable audience also knows, and the people also go through the same challenges. But I think that it's also important to know that you're not alone, and that we are struggling with many similar issues in our work.
Yeah, it was very important. So we have recorded the seminar, and we will upload it to the website. So whoever needed to go earlier will have the possibility to listen to later. Yeah, so thank you so much, and feel invited to the next seminar. I think that in September we will share with you our very, very preliminary reflections from the second round field. That this is the plan for now, and then in October we'll come back to inviting the external speaker. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, and yeah, see you in, I mean, at this platform, see you in September.
Thank you. We'll be happy to
Thank
join
you.
you as a listener in
Yeah,
September.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Sorry, I
Bye-bye.
missed whole lecture.
It wasn't a lecture, it was just thank you so much.